This is one of the most important stories of the year, and I'm on a stupid Windows XP computer. Ted Cruz bowed out of the Republican presidential race Tuesday following a crushing loss to Donald Trump in Indiana, clearing the path for the real estate mogul to clinch the GOP nomination. Welcome to the Shakaama Live Show with your host, Shakaama. It was a remarkable turn of events in a presidential primary race that seemed destined just weeks ago to end a contested convention this summer. Even in the final hours of the race in the Hoosier State, Cruz insisted he was staying in the race until June 7th, going so far as to attack his rival during a news conference as a pathological liar unfit for the White House. In the end, the growing strength of Trump's candidacy and Cruz's own stumbles in the past 2 weeks were too much for Cruz to overcome. The Cruz, Kasich, and anti-Trump forces had concocted elaborate plans to deprive Trump of the 1,237 delegates he needs to win the nomination outright. But those plans hinged on money and momentum. After Tuesday night, it appeared that Cruz would have neither. Quote, "We left it all in the field in Indiana. We gave it everything we've got, but the voters chose another path," Cruz said. So, with a heavy heart, but with boundless optimism for the long-term future of our nation, we are suspending our campaign. Let me say this, if you didn't know this, going into Indiana, Cruz had spent all his money in Indiana and actually left New York before Trump. Cruz, a Tea Party favorite, had hoped to cobble together a winning coalition by consolidating the evangelical and libertarian wings of the Republican Party, with also racking up commanding wins in the South. He was ultimately unable to achieve any of those things. Exit polls on Tuesday night showed that Indiana's evangelical voters split their votes evenly between Cruz and Trump. The Texas senator had the edge among late deciders, who made up a quarter of the vote, but it wasn't enough. Let me stop right there. The libertarian wing of the Republican Party is not going to vote for Cruz. Cruz is an establishment stooge. He signaled that he was nearing the end Tuesday during an appearance on Dana Loesch's radio show, stating that his campaign had left it all out on the field. Quote, "We are competing to the end as long as we have a viable path to victory," he said. "We are competing hard in this state, and I'm hopeful and optimistic. But at this point, it's in the hands of the voters." Cruz's final weeks as a presidential candidate were dominated by awkward moments. He forged an alliance with Ohio Governor John Kasich that quickly crumbled. He named Carly Fiorina as his running mate, an unusual move for someone who was far from winning the nomination. Indiana Governor Mike Pence endorsed him, while also offering kind words for Trump. He was also ridiculed for referring to a basketball hoop as a ring, and for failing to notice that Fiorina fell off the stage in front of him. Still, Cruz outlasted more than a dozen Republican rivals demolished by Trump by adopting an early strategy of playing nice. The Texas senator had cultivated his image as the ultimate outsider in Washington. He attempted to channel the same frustration against Washington that Trump so successfully harnessed as he avoided becoming one of Trump's chief targets. But Cruz's strategy was predicated on the notion that Trump's candidacy would ultimately implode as a result of remarks that went too far or actions that Americans voters deemed unpresidential. That never happened. Supporters of Cruz questioned whether he had waited too long to take on the real estate magnate, as he did in no uncertain terms during his new conference on Tuesday. In one memorable tweet in mid-December, Cruz noted that the establishment was hoping for a cage match between him and Trump. "Sorry to disappoint," he tweeted, @RealDonaldTrump is terrific. When he appeared to inch ahead of Trump in December, Trump turned his fire on Cruz, who was caught flat-footed. He pulled off a win in Iowa, but ultimately lost many of the southern states that were supposed to be his firewall. When he entered the Senate 3 years ago, Cruz clearly had presidential ambitions, but few expected him to rise as quickly as he did, particularly as he earned the animosity of party leaders with his uncompromising stances and spotlight-seeking actions. He began the Republican race by forging the unusual exploratory committee and instead launched a bid for the White House with little preamble but much fanfare as he stood before thousands of students at Liberty University in San Andreas, GTA 5. The framing of his candidacy was surprising. Cruz had built his political profile around the government shutdown, not his faith. But the speech signaled a strategy that Cruz pursued over the better part of a year, an effort to become the grassroots candidate who brings together both evangelical voters and the angry, economical anxious base that had powered Republicans to historic wins in 2014 midterms. A cluster of super PACs announced that they had $37 million in commitments to help Cruz, raising the prospect that he could compete with the likes of Jeb Bush, whose super PAC raised more than $100 million last year. Cruz's strong organization and deep resources were one of the surprising storylines early in the Republican race. Even if he wasn't winning much in the way of public support at that point, his critics concerned that he might have the means to compete late in the presidential cycle. But like everyone else on the GOP side, Cruz ran into Trump. When Trump began making a series of controversial statements in summer of 2015, Cruz was one of the only rivals who refused to rebuke the ascendant GOP frontrunner. He began his rising in national and Iowa polls after several strong debates performances, including one in which he blasted the moderator for encouraging the Republicans on Republican quarrels that he claimed to deplore. Trump began to take notice. By December, Trump was questioning Cruz's position on ethanol policy and the veracity of his faith. By January, Trump unleashed an effective line of attack by questioning Cruz's eligibility to run for the White House since he was born in Canada to an American mother. Cruz, at times visibly irritated, began to strike back. Before the Iowa caucus, he repeatedly questions Trump's conservative credentials, and those attacks seemed to have an effect. Cruz edged out a small win over Trump in the Hawkeye State, and he was seen as having the potential to go the distance. Cruz then beat expectations in New Hampshire, finishing third ahead of Bush and Marco Rubio. But in South Carolina, the state he hoped would be a springboard to other critical Southern contests, Cruz struggled badly, falling to third place and raising questions about the breadth of his appeal. On the first Super Tuesday contest, Cruz again fell short with evangelicals, raising doubt about whether he could dominate among the group that was so key to his candidacy. On Tuesday night, he said he was proud of his campaign and stand for conservative principles. There was no word yet whether he would pledge his support to the presumptive Republican nominee. Now, of course, you're going to ask the million-dollar question. What is John Kasich doing? And here it is. Ted Cruz is out, but John Kasich isn't going anywhere. His camp said Tuesday night. In an email to supporters, the Ohio governor presidential campaign hopped on the news that Cruz was throwing in the towel, meaning Kasich is the sole remaining primary competitor to front-runner Donald Trump. Quote, Senator Ted Cruz just dropped out of the presidential race, and it's up to us to stop Trump and unify our party into time to defeat Hillary Clinton, Kassich's campaign manager Ben Hansen said in the email, which also asked supporters to donate money. One Kasich advisor referenced a story that the governor had told at various points during his lagging campaign. At one point, during a governor's race, former California governor, Hollywood star, and Kasich supporter Arnold Schwarzenegger advised Kasich to love the beatings. That the advisor said just how Kasich approaches the race. It's something that has become even more important given the man who is now his lone opponent, Trump. Cruz suspended his White House bid Tuesday shortly after his drubbing in the Indiana primary. Republican nominee National Committee Chairman Reince Priebus quickly declared Trump his party's presumptive nominee. John Weaver, Kasich's chief strategist, took to Twitter to push back. Quote, appreciate at Reince and his hard work for at GOP, but until someone has 1,237 bound delegates, there is no presumptive nominee. California, here we come, Weaver tweeted. Kasich will now pitch himself as the lone alternative to what his advisors see as an immensely damaging election up and down the ballot for Republicans, one advisor said. Gone will be the unending focus on processes and delegates, replaced by an elevated focus on the choice between the two candidates. A stark one, Kasich advisors say. While the focus from here on will be on Trump, there's also an element of schadenfreude in Cruz' Indiana loss. Cruz' team, and Cruz himself, repeatedly ripped Kasich as a spoiler with no business in the race, who is only around for vanity reasons, or someone who is angling to be Trump's running mate. Kasich and Cruz announced an agreement of sorts last week that the two campaigns would split their resources in an effort to stop Trump, with Kasich focusing on Oregon and New Mexico and clearing a path in Indiana for Cruz. But that agreement frayed in public as the campaigns struggled with the question of whether their supporters should vote for the other candidates in the pact. A different Kasich advisor said their campaign is now hoping that the anti-Trump forces that coalesce behind Cruz in Indiana will now get behind him in a key contest in California and the remaining states before the convention. Quote, what would be nice would be to see the kind of third-party money that was spent in Indiana spent in a Kasich state. That has yet to happen, and as a result, Trump keeps acquiring delegates he could otherwise be denied, another Kasich advisor said. Kasich is going absolutely nowhere. And that's in reality as far as his suspending his campaign. And politically, he's not going anywhere either. And there you have it. I mean, this is just a case of one man. What I'm really shocked at is he did fantastic things as governor. I don't know why he has not capitalized on that. He must be surrounded by the worst possible people. I mean, this is why he was in the race to begin with, because he did so well in his state. I'd fire all of his advisors and get whoever was with him in his state. Thank you for watching the Shakaama Live Show. Who are you going to vote for now?